And we'd like to welcome our panel now for some political analysis on the remarkable week we just had. Molly Ball is a national political correspondent for Time magazine. Michael Gerson is a Washington Post columnist. And Jan Crawford is CBS News chief legal correspondent. We've been at the table all week together. Jan, Michael, I want to start with you. Where are we at the end of this week?
Well, I think the tribes in American politics have their big narratives about Me Too and about, a political ambush on the part of the Democrats. But when you actually watched the hearing, these were two raw human beings. You seldom see in political life people that are exposing their deepest selves on television. And so, in the case of Dr. Ford, after her testimony, I felt emotionally, this is over. There's no way that they can go forward with Kavanaugh, given the credibility of what was said. And then I saw Kavanaugh, who acted like a man who was deeply wronged, and was credible in that sense, credible even in being a little out of control, okay, as you might be in a circumstance like that. And so it's, everyone's now going to the FBI because it's the only respected institution left in our public life. Right. And they're probably not going to solve this matter. And it's going to be interesting, how do people make their choices about the burden of proof? That's
exactly right. Molly, what do you think? Where are we?
Well, in practical terms, the Senate is in a state of sort of suspended animation, right? There were enough senators who did feel that the FBI might be able to bring some clarity to this, that I think Senator Flake and others were convinced that there were at least enough outstanding questions that maybe evidence could either be surfaced or at least be ruled out, the existence of potential evidence that they could go out and look for. So everything is going to hinge on what, if anything, this investigation finds. But Senator Flake, for Senator Flake, this wasn't just about the two witnesses or this particular partisan battle. He said this is about trying to bring the country together, because for him, the way that it had devolved into this pitched partisan battle that seemed to be without regard for what the underlying truth was, that was what bothered him more than anything. There were other Republican senators who agreed with that, who felt that they wanted more clarity before going forward, and that clarity could be, in one direction or the other, but in a week's time, potentially they'll feel better about whichever vote they decide to take.
Yeah, that's a tough job for the FBI to make people feel better in this current moment.
And I think that's not going to happen. I think it's a mistake to think that the FBI report will really change anyone's minds. I think Democrats are not going to be satisfied with it. They're going to say it was too limited, they needed more witnesses, we need more time, and we need another hearing to hear from some of these witnesses. And Republicans are never going to agree to that, with the real memories of 1991 and Justice Thomas on their minds. And we can't understate the impact that has had on the distrust that you see in this committee and how that was handled in 1991 by the Democrats. So the question then becomes, what difference does it make to those three moderate Republicans, Jeff Flake, Susan Collins, and Lisa Murkowski? And my sense is the FBI report, once they've gotten these statements under oath from the FBI, that may be enough to satisfy them, because at least then they can say, well, we did do an FBI investigation. That is now something they can check off.
Right. And so, Molly, what Jan says makes sense to me, which is that you have the Republicans here who were inclined to vote for Judge Kavanaugh anyway, so that after a week, doesn't it have to be a piece of evidence so big that they say, well, I was inclined to go in this direction, but this has blocked me? Is that really what the test is?
I think that's right. And I would add to that, there's a couple of moderate Democrats hanging in the balance as well. And that was Senator Flake's hope, was that if enough clarity could be brought to this, or at least leads run to ground, that then Democrats and Republicans who find themselves caught in the middle, yes, the majority of Democrats have made up their minds and are going to vote against this nomination no matter what. And the majority of Republicans have made up their minds and are going to vote to confirm almost no matter what. But there are enough in the middle, in that small bipartisan caucus of swing votes. And Senator Flake's hope was that by bringing those people together, one could show the nation that this was not merely a partisan problem.
Yeah, I would only add, though, the FBI investigation, the extent of it is still up in the air. I talked to Senator Flake this morning, and they're still negotiating with Don McGahn and determining who's going to be talked to, the extent of the pool of who's going to be talked to. And that could add additional information. I'm not sure it's going to determine what happened in that room that they're talking about, but it could certainly add support to one side or another. It's possible. But I agree with that these senators, someone like Senator Collins, really likes Kavanaugh. I mean, she has told other people that it was one of the best judicial interviews she's ever had when they talked. So I think there is a predisposition here among Republicans to go unless there's something decisive.
Jan, one of the other avenues that some Democrats are talking about is that Judge Kavanaugh made a lot of assertions about how much he drank, his behavior, and that there are classmates in high school and in college who challenged those claims. That's not about 36 years ago. That's about claims he's making now in the hearing room. Do you think they have any grounds there? Because their argument is this goes to his credibility. He can't be a judge if he's not telling us the truth now.
You know, the way I see that is that it kind of goes back to his demeanor in this hearing. And to your point, that he was outraged and at times indignant, and as some people have said, he came across as belligerent. But this was a man who said, this is my life. This is the life I've lived for the last 36 years. I've put up countless character witnesses, including from high school, that this was my behavior. And we are sitting here talking about people I don't know or remember from high school or college. It was almost like he was incredulous that this was the conversation. And so I would not expect any of that to come up in an FBI report when you're going to try to find, that's not what the FBI's role is in this. And it's an interesting world that we're in right now if we're going to have politicians on Capitol Hill able to instruct the FBI to go and investigate whether or not someone's roommate in college believes that they drank. There's no allegation of criminal misdoing here. There's no jurisdiction for the FBI. This is supposed to be done as a confidential FBI background check for a Supreme Court nominee. So I feel we kind of need to remember what is the point of the FBI, what is the role of the FBI, and how comfortable are we just having politicians give the FBI this wide-ranging authority to investigate any behavior in someone's background once they put themselves up for public service. It's a different road that we're going on.
Michael, we are having a big, large cultural moment as well. Is it possible for a politician to say, I believe what Dr. Ford said, I believe that women don't immediately report, I believe all of the things that have been very much in the news, and yet a standard of proof has not been met, and I'm going to vote for Judge Kavanaugh?
Well, I think that's what Senator Flake may end up, and some other people in that position, of saying this was credible testimony. But there's a precedent here that says, based on one accusation without contemporaneous corroboration, that you can't make decisions based on that. I think a lot of Republicans will be in that situation. And it is a conflict, but I do think a lot of people in public life, men, imagine themselves in the same circumstance of being accused.
Mm-hmm. And mothers with sons. And grandmothers with, it's not, and sisters with brothers. So I think it's a mistake to think of it as just this is how women see this and this is how men might see it.
And the imagination is different than the facts, which is that there are more unreported sexual assaults than there are men who are publicly accused. I mean, there are acute examples, but the balance of the fact tends to go to people who have been sexually assaulted and don't talk about it. So if that's the case, Molly, is there a risk politically for someone who says, look, something has not been proved here, that Democrats will say, you're missing the central point, that to understand the experience of women is to believe them when they say these things?
Well, I think the bigger picture politically is that while there were many who saw themselves in the shoes of Judge Kavanaugh, there were also a lot of American women who were strongly compelled by Dr. Ford. Yeah, and the emotional outpouring that you saw all across the country, people calling into their members of Congress, people watching transfixed on screens all across the country this hearing, it was a really wrenching and emotional occasion for America. And I think it's one that we're going to look back on as a cultural touchstone for years to come. In political terms, we're going into a midterm election where, had this never occurred, it was already an election about women's anger and women's voices and a female-driven backlash to all of the cultural and political currents of the day. And so, this only drives that further. It's almost absurdly fitting that this should be the sort of final political controversy before this year's election.
That's right. Well, as Michael said, the tribes have their narratives out of this. All right, we're going to have to end it there. Thanks to all of you.